Episode 61 of the Social Exchange Podcast. It's also the first episode of Season 5. I really don't know if there's any significance to declaring this a new season. There is. It's a way to mark a new format of the show and a new or reimagined direction for the show. First, I want to let you know that these interviews are available now both as audio podcasts, to which you're accustomed, and also in video form. So if you like YouTube video content, then subscribe to the Social Exchange Podcast on YouTube for your viewing pleasure. Link in the show notes. Earlier today, a listener of the show and a friend of mine paid me a great compliment. He said that he tunes into the podcast because he believes I'm honest, and insofar as the mainstream media and social media makes information and truth more and more difficult to parse, he likes to know that he's aligning his interest and attention with honest journalism. I hadn't really thought about this podcast itself as journalism before, but I guess that's in a sense what it is and what I'd like it to become more of. So of course I'm happy for the compliment. What he expressed in that statement really illuminated all that I want to accomplish in hosting a podcast in the first place. I want to try my best to make sense of salient issues by talking to people who either know more about the issues than me, or maybe they've been thinking about particular issues for longer than I have, or maybe in a different way than I usually do. And I'm going to be talking to people who I agree with, people with whom I disagree, people whose beliefs I may be confused about. There's no preferential treatment except that I want the conversations to be interesting, honest, and help me and all of you move in a direction of, gaining deeper truth. So hey, let me depress you for a second, and I promise to build you back up. Before COVID, we already had a sense that things were polarized and that our whole republic was growing more fragile and at ever alarming rates. And now, post-COVID or mid-COVID, we also have protests, fires, other looming events, things that just seem to cascade endlessly. And we're having trouble sharing even a fundamental understanding of what is true about all these things. And that is super consequential in our quest to solve the aforementioned problems that I believe are necessary to address, and some of them in rush order. Take your top 3, 4, 5, 6 issues that are most pressing on your mind, things that are trending in the news and that are top of mind and most in need of solving. And ask yourself, for which of these is there a solid consensus on across the electorate, about what the issue is and what a reasonable solution would look like. And you've noticed, I'm sure, that it's not only that there is no consensus or common ground about what's real or true, but there's something like peak opposition within the country. So I don't really know what to do about this. I know it's a problem. I think everyone is sort of realizing it's a problem. I do know that having honest, constructive, maybe difficult conversations in good faith has to be a reasonable starting point, because doing so gets us slightly closer to being more reasonable than what we're currently doing, which as far as I can tell is just making a lot of noise, aimlessly. Despite having values and interests and beliefs and wanting to follow through with those, if only we could do it collectively. So, my guest today is Anthony Magnabosco, and I don't know if he'll agree with everything I just said, but I do know that he values honest and constructive conversations as much as I do, and in fact, he spends most of his time having conversations with strangers about deeply held beliefs. I always laugh when I say that because it's just so difficult to think about people en masse having conversations with strangers about deeply held beliefs. But that's what he does. He likes to chat with people about what they believe, why they believe it, how confident that they are that their belief is true, how they arrived at their beliefs, and he tries to understand what, if anything, it would take to shift that confidence level. You may not know what I'm talking about. Anthony Magnabosco is a practitioner of, I'm going to call it a dialogic practice, or a style of conversation called Street Epistemology. In lay terms, he has casual conversations about truth claims and beliefs. I've linked to his YouTube channel and a few of his recent videos in the show notes, and you'll see him in action there. When there was not a global pandemic, Anthony made a very regular hobby of standing in public areas and respectfully asking people if they'd like to participate in this kind of conversation on camera, with the understanding that it could be going up on YouTube for a lot of people to see. And I am always amazed at the sheer quantity of people who are happy to do this, knowing full well that the talk may wind up on a popular YouTube channel. And I'm always impressed that these conversations go so well. So both Anthony and his interlocutor nearly always leave this conversation. Remember, they're strangers before having the conversation. They almost always leave the conversation wiser from the experience. At least I think so. It seems like it. It seems like they respect each other. Anthony's never trying to talk people out of believing something or into believing something. He doesn't make assumptions that they believe things for no reasons. He doesn't go in with some belief that he thinks this person ought to have. And he's open to changing his mind throughout the conversation as well. He's just basically interested in what people are thinking and believing and how they're arriving at what they see to be truth. And his questions and overall style reflect that. Can you imagine what the country would be like if we were able to have these sorts of conversations at scale? Unlike most conversations among strangers to which I've become accustomed, Anthony's conversations usually begin and end peacefully and respectfully. He ends his conversation with open-ended questions or suggestions like encouraging his interlocutor to reflect once more on his or her belief, and he asks if that person's level of confidence has shifted, maybe. Whatever the answer, he always leaves it alone and then thanks the person for participating. He gives them his contact information, encourages them to reach back out if they have anything new to add to the conversation, like maybe they'll process the conversation later and realize that they meant to say one thing when they said another, or maybe they just want to chat again. So I'm sitting here watching Anthony's conversations on YouTube, and even though I know he's honest, sometimes I sit here skeptically waiting for the second order question to come, the real gotcha question, but it never does. So again, this conversation style is called Street Epistemology, and it's a framework that was developed by Professor Peter Boghossian. It pulls from all sorts of conversation styles like motivational interviewing, Socratic dialogue, reflective and active listening, and a lot more, things that you may be familiar with. So, look, why not kick off the new season of the podcast, a podcast that I want to be about having tricky conversations about important topics with a person who has honed this craft as a part of an overall movement. And actually, before I send you to the episode, it was important to Anthony that I tell you this. Street epistemology has become something of a movement. Several other people practice it and film it and are involved in the movement, and so everything that we talk about today are Anthony's own opinions and his own beliefs. He stands behind them with greater or lesser levels of confidence, but they do not necessarily represent the street epistemology movement. Okay, you have heard plenty from me. I hope you'll enjoy the Social Exchange Podcast, Season 5. We're kicking it off with Mr. Anthony Magnabosco. I'll give you a little, I'll let you introduce yourself and what you do. I have a bad habit of trying to, I take someone's bio and then read it back to them and they're like, actually, so, but yeah. Suffice it to say, I think I can safely say I'm with Anthony Magnabosco, and Anthony was a guest on an early episode of our podcast, but we were still trying to figure out how to run audio. I was still trying to figure out how to interview people. And I was, I think, in that stage in my own head a lot, I was asking questions because I thought that maybe it would make me look better to ask those questions rather than what would give value to people listening. If I was a podcast listener listening back to my own shows, I thought, well, that was sort of a selfish question. So interesting. You were one of the most interesting people who I've interviewed, and I follow your work probably more than most people who I've interviewed in the past. And I've had some pretty cool guests on. So I thought it was cool that you were willing to come back on so I could give what I feel like perhaps is going to be a more proper and more valuable interview.
That's an interesting observation because I've looked at my own work and I've noticed progression over time. We start grasping how many people are watching it and the different perspectives of people who are consuming the content. And when you actually go out to make the content, it influences it in some ways, I think. But I think that's growth. That sounds like growth to me.
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to have you back on. I'm proud to have you back on, and I feel a little more comfortable. Let's tell people what it is that you do. I think that I can introduce it and not screw it up by saying that you practice a form of conversation and actually a form of helping you and others look a little bit more deeply and thoroughly at beliefs that they hold and why they believe those things. And you call this street epistemology.
Yeah, it's not a term that I'm really fond of because it it somewhat misleads people into thinking that you have to go out on the street and talk about this stuff, and there's an academic component to it. And it's almost the opposite. You can have these conversations anywhere, and you don't have to be well-versed in philosophy or psychotherapy or anything along those lines. That's what was appealing to me when I learned about street epistemology, which is where you essentially try to set aside your ego as much as possible and focus on the person who's making the claim and trying to be a mirror to them, while at the same time challenging them in a respectful way where you're asking questions to get down to the foundation that's propping it all up. And it's a challenging thing. It sounds like, when I say that, it sounds like really easy and basic, but if you've ever tried to do it, and maybe people in your audience have backgrounds where that's an interest to them, and they've tried this, it could be really tough to take yourself out of the conversation as much as possible and only focus on what the person is saying, and then formulate really good questions to challenge them to the point where they're a little bit uncomfortable, but not to the point where they're shutting down and closing down. You know, you want to try to help people stay open and comfortable and build trust and really figure out what's propping this belief up, and what would it take to lower your confidence in that claim. And these are conversations that we're not really having these days. Like, if you look at the discourse that's happening today, it's a complete shit show. It's horrible. We're arguing, we're debating, we're talking past each other. And this is, I think, probably one of the best ways to communicate with people about difficult topics, which is why it sucked me in. When I learned it and started practicing it, I'm in. I don't think I could ever shift to debating or arguing with anybody ever again, honestly. I really don't think I could do it, because it just doesn't seem like it's effective or productive.
I know the feeling, although I have a sense that you're skilled at this at a somewhat deeper level than I am. But when you go out and talk to people, if people haven't seen your YouTube videos, your channel is Anthony Magnabosco.
I named it after my name.
That's a good classic. But what people will see is you are stopping people on the street, not abrasively, but you are inviting people to have conversations with you. And, you know, the first video I saw of yours, it's like, what would I be thinking when this guy approaches me? And I think probably that he wants a survey, or, and then you can watch you showing in good faith that, no, really, I just want to have a conversation, and you're free to go anytime. And then I hear you talk to complete strangers, asking them to share belief that they hold that maybe is core to them. And I'm so surprised at how many people, I know that you probably edit some, maybe some don't go as well, you can tell me, but I'm still surprised at the sheer quantity of people willing to talk about beliefs. And it seems otherworldly. Like these aren't conversations, like you say, that I see happening anywhere else.
It's odd. It's bizarre, because I thought there's no way I'm ever going to get anyone to stop and feel comfortable to share a deeply held belief, and then allow me to interrogate them in a respectful way, and on top of that, record them. But it's not that hard to. Surprisingly, it's not that hard to do. I think that there are things that you can do to help a person feel comfortable and build trust to make those things happen. But yeah, generally speaking, maybe 1 out of 4 people will say, sure, I'll do that. And then the other 3 that go by, I thank them for their time, or maybe, you know, invite them to come back later after they've had a chance to look into what I'm doing or something like that. But for the most part, yeah, people will agree to do it. And it seems like they are enjoying it, which is feedback to me to say, there's something good happening here. Like, rarely does somebody say, like, I don't think I've ever had somebody say, I've hated that conversation, don't ever use it, and how dare you do what you're doing. That's never, ever happened. Now, maybe people have thought that, and I've never received that feedback. But for the most part, people do seem to enjoy it. And maybe it is because it's a stranger, and it's not like it's somebody who knows you, and it's not a family member where you have all this history, that maybe people feel a little bit more open to share their views or allow their views to be interrogated in this way, because there's that stranger component. But then again, a lot of people will use street epistemology with people that they know. Yeah. So it's odd. I was taken aback by that at first. Like, yeah, but now it's like, I know I can go out and get 10 interviews if I really wanted to. Maybe not in the COVID era, you know, Things have changed a little bit, but I think it's probably possible.
Does the camera add Do you think hesitation?
Yes, I think the camera almost certainly adds an element of awkwardness and uncomfortableness, maybe. Maybe younger people, possibly, they're a little bit more comfortable with the camera there. Do you ever notice that I usually wear a black shirt?
Yeah.
I want that camera to basically become invisible.
Yeah.
So the camera's black, my shirt is black, I've turned off the light, but I don't start filming until people agree to do it. So they know that they're being recorded, and I usually point out other cameras that I have, sort of different angles, and it's become this kind of complex operation. But yeah, I don't know if the cameras, I think maybe initially they make people a little bit nervous, but I'll just try to spend a little bit of extra time. If I detect that maybe they're uncomfortable, I might spend another extra minute building some rapport before shifting to a claim that they have. Because an uncomfortable conversation partner is probably not going to result in a really good, profound discussion. So I try to keep that in mind. But, I'm trying to record examples for people like yourself and others to watch and see what we're doing and give us suggestions on how to improve. So it's almost a necessary element for at least what I'm doing. But again, you don't have to record any of the stuff. Very few people go out in public and record these talks.
You call what you do a hobby, but it seems very professional. I do clinical work, and people have years and years of education about how they ought to build rapport with people and be a mirror for them and speak reflectively and actively. It's really difficult until you get out and do it. What brings a guy like you to wanting to do this in the first place? And how did you did you always have a knack for this, or is it something you definitely had to build over time?
I'm somewhat of an introvert, to be honest. I don't like going to weddings where you have to chit chat with people, or even just like family gatherings. I'd much rather be throwing the ball in the backyard with the kids than getting around the adults and talking with them. So this wasn't an adjustment for me, but I read this book that was introducing the concept of street epistemology and the idea of making progress with people where you weren't arguing, but you were providing questions, and that it could profoundly help a person take another look at their views. That was extremely appealing to me because I was having bad conversations with people in my life about sensitive topics, namely religion, but other stuff too. So I guess there weren't any examples at the time when I started doing this back in 2012, 2013. So nobody was uploading video examples of people using this approach. And I said, well, I'm going to just go out and do it. So if you look at earlier examples, they're very raw. They're very rough. I'm jumping right to, tell me why you think God is real. That was my first question. And it's evolved a lot over time. So it's been this constant cycle of taking a few steps forward and then a few steps back, where you're learning and then you're trying to implement a better way the next time you go out. So I guess I have to say, I think I've become really good at it just because I've stuck with it long enough and I've paid attention to what is effective and what is not effective. And I've always tried to incorporate that every time I go out to do more talks.
You said that early on, one of the things that you've seen that you've improved on is you don't jump to that big question right away. What is your belief, or why do you believe this thing? Explain to people who may not be aware or may be curious why that wouldn't be beneficial, or why it's better now, or why not jump to why do you believe in God?
Well, for the last 3 or 4 years now, for several years now, I would say we've realized that you can use this approach of asking questions, much like the Socratic method. It seems like what we're doing is like the Socratic method plus psychotherapy techniques and maybe some other stuff that we're just throwing in there. We're just novices. We're just kind of throwing things together and seeing what works, but it seems like it's working. If you lead with, there's value in building rapport because you can get a sense of how comfortable they are talking about this topic with you. You can encourage them to pick a topic that they'd like to explore. So rather than saying, I'm here to talk to you about why you think God is real, you can say, I'm out here asking questions to respectfully challenge people's claims that they think are true. Is there anything in particular that you'd like to discuss? A lot more open. And it's a better respect of the tool, I think, because you can use it to challenge all different types of claims. So when you lead with, like, here's the topic that I want to talk about, that's a completely different animal than saying, what topic would you like to explore? There's a huge difference just right in that. You tend to result in a more open person who's willing to talk with you about something that they are willing to talk about, not necessarily something that they're compromising to meet your need. And that's the whole ethos of this approach is let's go where you want to go. Now I have to introduce what I'm doing, and I almost overshare what I'm doing. Like, I have this kind of, if you've watched anything recently, you'll notice I usually spend a minute or two explaining what I'm doing, and here's the possible outcomes, and I like to ask these questions, and I want to get down to the foundation that's propping it all up, and I want to pick something that's core to your identity, and it affects how you behave. So I'm laying it all out there, but then I'm stepping back and saying, do you consent? Would you like to do this? Mm. And then you can end this at any time. I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes, but you're not obligated to stay to that point or even beyond.
You mentioned that this is something that you take away too. You don't have to do it on camera. I imagine the camera and just the setup gives us some context though. I mean, I'm an introvert too, but I've spoken with people like you on podcasts before, and I'm comfortable in that setting talking, for instance. But if I see someone like you who I'm interested in at, say, a conference, I just by virtue of everything else going on, even if I get you one-on-one, it may be difficult for me to apply the context to be able to have a conversation about a deeply held belief. And I wonder if you have that same, all that to say, is it different at trying to use this method away from the camera than it is when you're, setting it up and doing it for the show?
That's a good question. You would think that not having the camera would make it easier as a practitioner, because it's a piece of equipment they have to worry about, and you have to explain and get permission. So, but knowing that I'm recording it and that people could possibly be watching it, I think helps me be on my better behavior, because I know people are watching it. Now, we can be doing I was just driving and I saw some guy standing on the street with a sign that said something like Jesus heals. And I was so tempted to pull over, but it was close to the start of this interview. I just knew I couldn't do it. And I was thinking, but I'm not recording it. And it's a better use of my time if I could record it and all this other stuff. Anyways, I don't think that I would really act much differently if I had the camera or not. Now, my conversation partners may feel more calm and more natural if it wasn't being recorded. But then again, maybe people are being more honest if they know it's being recorded. It's kind of this weird thing where I don't really know what the impact is on it, but I've used this approach whether I'm recording it or not. But at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh, I wish this was recorded because this is so good. This is one of the best conversations I've ever had, and I really can't share it other than maybe summarizing it and making a tweet out of it or something. So it kind of, I'm always thinking when I have these engagements, how can I use this to show other people so that they can consider using it in their engagements? So I sometimes I get disappointed when it's not being recorded.
What does it look like for you to use this method? And maybe spend a little time talking about what it is, the steps that you go through to talk to people. But say with colleagues at a dinner table, do you have to transform the way that you do it at all?
I don't think I've ever been like at a dinner party with multiple people standing around where I then introduce myself and say, do you mind if I ask you some questions? I think that would just the venue would just be sort of weird. But I think it could be done. The challenge there would be the other people who were observing would probably be tempted to jump in. And the person that I was interviewing or conversing with or using this method with, and we can get into the steps after this, I suppose, but they might feel a little bit more self-conscious if they knew that other people, their spouse maybe was there and their boss is listening in. The whole dynamic is different. This approach seems to be really good when you're having a one-on-one talk, whether it's recorded or not, and you're you're relaxed, there's no distractions, and you can really give your full attention to it. That's what seems to work best for me. There's different challenges in all these different venues, but that would be my suggestion. If you have the ability to go to, let's say you're at a dinner party and somebody says something at the table, well, maybe you wait an hour until you're sort of broken up into these little groups, and you can pull the person aside and ask them if they wouldn't mind if you ask them a few questions about it. You could try that. So I guess, do you want to get into the technical aspects of this?
Yeah, tell me the steps of this. I went full dinner party on you, and I was just trying to think of a situation not on the street. I don't know why. Maybe I'm hungry, but my mom went to dinner party. Yeah, maybe it'd be helpful if you laid out a few steps about how you start these conversations.
Well, I mean, lately, because of COVID, I've been indoors. So sometimes I'll notice a TikTok video or something on Twitter or a YouTube video, and I may make a comment and say, it's an interesting perspective. I'd be really curious to determine how you figured out that that's true. Can we, if you're willing, would you like to have it? And sometimes like this plays out in the comments section of these videos. But anyway, so it sort of starts off with noticing that somebody's making a claim about reality, like a truth claim, not necessarily an opinion. Opinions are kind of hard to use this method on. Like someone says, chocolate cake is my favorite. Well, I'm not interested in that. But if they say like chocolate cake will make you live 10 years older if you eat it every Sunday or something, that's a fact claim. So identifying a claim, but then also maybe taking a step back and saying, all right, is this the right venue? Are there distractions? What are my motivations as a practitioner? What am I hoping to achieve from this? At what point would I say, maybe I'm crossing line or pushing a little bit too much? And then also explaining what you're doing and getting consent. That's probably like the first bracket of things that maybe you want to consider. And then if they agree and they understand what they're getting into, I might say, can I figure out, it would probably be helpful for me to understand exactly what your claim is. Can you lay it out really clearly and maybe give me an idea of how sure you are that it's factually true on a scale from 0 to 10 or 0 to 100. Work out all the definitions. So once you've done that, then I might shift into, well, what are the reasons that are propping this up? Like, what are your top 3 reasons? And rather than just assuming that those are the reasons, confirming that those are the reasons. Because this is one thing that I've learned is that oftentimes the reasons that people give might not be the reasons that's propping it up. Like if you plowed through all 3 reasons and they discovered on their own by you asking questions that those 3 weren't good reasons, they wouldn't dip at all from their pre-established level of confidence. It's probably not the reason that's propping it up. It might be, well, I guess when it all comes down to it, it just kind of makes me feel good to think that it's true. Okay. But that wasn't the first reason that surfaced. So you have to sort of verify that the things that you're being told are indeed factors in the pre-established level of confidence in the claim. But once you've isolated and you say, okay, now this is the one big reason, this is the huge reason, like, let's say it makes me feel good to think that there are spirits and they get thirsty. And if I leave out water for them, and it's a good thing to do for the deceased loved ones in my life. And I guess when it comes down to it, I don't really have any good reasons, but I know I told you these 3 reasons, but I guess when it comes down to it, my biggest reason is it makes me feel good to know that I'm looking out for the loved ones that have passed. Okay, so that's once we've established the reason, and it could be that reason or anything else. Like I think that prophecies are good, or I think I have evidence for this. The final, one of the latter stages of this process is to have a discussion about how they're verifying that that's a sufficient reason. That's the crux of street epistemology, is the method that people are using to verify that they have decent reasons to support the level of confidence that they've built. And that's where you can ask a question along the lines of something like, well, if we discovered somebody who was thinking that leprechauns were real, and when it came down to it, they got a good feeling for thinking that it was true, would they be justified? So sort of an outsider, taking an outsider's perspective of the method that they're using, at which point many people will say, well, no, that's probably not a really good reason to build this on, and maybe I really can't be as sure that this is factually true. And then at that point, and sometimes they may say, yeah, like they're just as justified in thinking that leprechauns are real. And I've actually think leprechauns are real too. You'll be surprised at the answers that you get, even though there might be sort of almost an appearance of a scripted path. You have to, as a practitioner, you have to be open to going where people take you, because people will take you for these incredible rides. You don't know where you're going. That's what's so fun about it, honestly. I've learned to never expect anything. Always be open to going where people are taking you. Make sure that it's very clear, but also paying attention to seeing where they may be becoming too uncomfortable with your questions, and also knowing when to end it. I don't know if you've ever, do you deal with patients and things? Like, are there points where you say, okay, even though we got 10 more minutes in this session, I think maybe we should just wrap it up and call it a day. Do you ever do that?
I don't usually call it. No, but I do. I feel sometimes as though I wish I could. But usually that's because I'm not doing a great job of doing what you said and letting people take me wherever they are, or letting people describe to me whatever it really is on their mind. I think that's actually one of the problems of the context of therapy in general, is that people can say that they're practicing motivational interviewing, say, but oftentimes I see that people have a goal in mind. Addiction, for example. There is sometimes a goal that a person should move toward abstaining from using drugs or alcohol or something like that. And if your mindset is that, then I see that it could sway people to ask questions that point in that direction and close people off. And I've definitely been guilty of doing that before, even though I don't believe that people need to be abstinent from drugs or alcohol. But that kind of captures the spirit of mistakes I make.
That's something that we, and myself included, as practitioners of this method, is that we are walking into these conversations with our own positions, our own biases,
right,
our own goals. And sometimes we see somebody who's holding a view that they can't justify, and we think, gosh, just 2 or 3 more questions and they may come around to my point of view. And it's kind of tempting to know when it's tempting to keep going towards a goal that I have when it's not their goal. So this is something that we debate in the Street Epistemology community, and there's a Discord server and Reddit and all sorts of stuff where people can go to learn this. But we're human beings who have our own views, who are using this approach, and you can use it, I think, to deconvert somebody or to have them come around to your point of view. But I'm trying to advocate for like an ethical approach to this, to the usage of this tool, to saying, let's help people realize perhaps that maybe they don't have the best reasons or the most reliable methods to be so sure that that's true, and then leave them alone to figure it out, but be available to them if they're struggling, because these questions can really be problematic, or guide them to a community if they ask for it. Or encourage them to use the tool so that they can continue using it on themselves, or invite them to come back and use it on me. So, yeah.
Well, do you find, this springs to mind, do you find that when you're open-minded like that, that you turn out to learn rather than teach? Like, do you have conversations with people that instead of saying, all right, I probably should convert this person, or tell them, try to figure out why their belief is bullshit, if you just say, well, they believe something before they came to me, it's not up to me to teach them that they should believe something else, is truly in good faith, I'm just asking questions and engaging in critical thinking, do you leave the conversation sometimes believing something different or having a different level of confidence about a belief?
I've come around on a few beliefs, namely abortion, gun control, downloading music, should you pay the artist, things like that. You definitely gain a lot of empathy when you talk to people who are holding these views. It's weird. Sometimes it's frustrating because you meet very confident believers. They're so sure that it's true, and they're so sure that you're wrong and you need to come along to my point of view. And then when you ask a few questions, you realize that they don't have good reasons and they can't verify those reasons reliably using a reliable method. And it's kind of frustrating at times when you see confident believers who have never really processed the quality of their reasons. But then again, like sometimes you do meet people who have really good reasons and a reliable method, and it causes me a pause to take a look at my own views and say, Like maybe I need to take another look at that claim, because that person did a great job of answering my questions. I've never met somebody who could answer those questions as good as that person did. So yeah, that is the thing that kind of reminds me that this isn't evangelizing for a position. If I'm allowing myself to be open to considering what they're saying and maybe even shifting my own views on it. But it's kind of tough. Like, you know, your ego is invested in your views.
Yeah. But do you see, it sounds like you're saying something that I've come to pretty recently, which is that when people are confident about something that you really don't believe is true, maybe you even believe it's harmful to believe it, it's easy to see those people as harmful people or bad people or some level of not as good as someone who believes something better. But if you are using your technique in earnest, it seems like you feel instead compassion, and understanding that you're not bad. Perhaps you don't have the skills or haven't exercised the skills of thinking through this position. And maybe you even learn, oh, you have thought deeply about this. And maybe I was on the wrong foot.
Yeah. I guess initially when I meet somebody who's so steadfast in their views, it was upsetting to me, because I think you're just so closed-minded. Can you just open up your mind and be willing to consider that you might be wrong? And then, of course, then you see all the things that they're acting out on because they think that it's true. It could be very discouraging as a practitioner. But something switched like 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, where it started dawning on me that these are likely good people who just have a mistaken view of reality. So you tend to start looking at it from an empathetic point of view, from a place of compassion, from a place of love, almost seeing them as victims, but also reminding myself that I am probably a victim of my own belief systems as well. I'm probably locked into views that are not true, that are ripe for somebody to come along and question me about, so that I can lower my confidence in them or increase my confidence in them or something.
There's a feeling that I've had before about being open to understanding and admitting that I have biases and that I don't know what they are. That, you know, if I feel like I have to be open about that, especially at the beginning when I first started asking people difficult questions, felt like I was being taken somewhere with a blindfold on and spun around and asked to navigate or something like that. So just feeling that I'm probably wrong about something, but I'm not sure what it is. And it sounds as though you can ameliorate that fear if you would call, I don't know if you relate to this, but, or if you think something different about it, but of just knowing that there's something that you don't know everything in the world. If you're just able to engage people and be interested and open to those answers, truly open to the answers.
Yeah. I mean, I used to be a very anxious kid. Like I would have like tics and things. And I was just a really nervous, anxious little kid. But I mean, that kind of waned as I got older, but it almost entirely has gone away. Like when you start to realize that it's okay to be uncertain about things, it's okay to say, I don't know. It's much better to just acknowledge that I'm not sure about that than to pretend that I think that I have the truth on it. That is a liberating kind of feeling. It takes a lot of the pressure off if you can just acknowledge, I don't know the answer to that. You seem to think that you have the answer. Can we explore how you determine that that's the case? So lowering yourself from a dogmatic position of being 100% certain on things opens you up to considering other people's positions and being a little bit more humble about what it is you in fact think that you know. And that's been a huge impact on my own personal growth, this approach, and engaging with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. You become really good at questioning other people, but you become really good about questioning yourself and being comfortable with your inability to provide answers to your own questions.
You mentioned earlier that you don't think people engage in these kinds of conversations a lot. I mean, at least there's not great evidence that people are having these conversations ubiquitously or anything. And I hear so much about politics now. I remember when talking about religion seemed like a really hot potato issue, still is. It seems more difficult to talk about politics now for me than it does to talk about religion. Have you moved this kind of conversation and these steps towards talking about politics?
Well, I try to encourage anyone who wants to speak with me to pick the topic. And I usually throw out a couple of sample topics. Like, we can talk about politics, we can talk about a social issue, we can talk about religion or anything along those lines, maybe a supernatural claim. And in my area, almost nobody picks politics. And I don't know why that's the case. Maybe it's because they don't feel prepared to talk about it, and they're so sure that their God is real or that they saw the ghost, and it's more of a confidence issue. Then again, maybe people, these are all hypotheses, maybe people have seen people talk about politics and they understand how ugly it can get. And when I talk about a supernatural claim, a lot of people around me give me a pass about those things. So it's probably a safer topic. So I don't have a lot of experience talking about political claims, but the SE community as a whole is moving into that arena. There are lots of conversations online now. There are videos from people, not just me. I don't know if you paid attention to me, you're probably noticing content from other people.
Yeah.
And it does seem like it's getting into the political realm. We're talking about vaccines. We're talking about mask usage. We're talking about Donald Trump's tax returns and whether or not that should have an impact in your perception of him as being this wonderful leader or not, or something like that. So that's where it's going. We formed a nonprofit within the last year or so, and we tabled at a couple of political conventions where no matter what party you might identify with, they were represented there, and we were promoting this method of discourse, and we were having conversations at the table with people stopping by. Many of those were recorded, and it was fabulous. You got the same reactions that you would see on one of the videos where we were talking about ghosts or God.
That's so interesting.
I think it's harder though. I think it's tougher to challenge political claims because there's so many instances or examples that people would point to and say, well, this is why I'm a Democrat, or this is why I'm a Republican. So just helping a person discover that it really is a problem that Donald Trump hasn't been paying taxes is probably not going to sway a person they're not going to leave the Republican Party that day, right? There's thousands of other reasons. But here's the cool thing, or the interesting thing. It seems like people's politics are fundamentally tied to their view on whether or not that there's a higher power, that they see themselves as good people depending on their answer to that question. And I think their politics, I myself, even though I was like I was like an agnostic or atheist. Even before I came around to the atheist label, I would have identified as a Republican. But it was when I started realizing I have no good reason for thinking that that's true, that God exists, for example, it fundamentally shifted my politics. So this is one of the reasons why I like talking about the God claim so much, is because there are so many other ancillary beliefs that are tied to it that will likely be affected if people come to discover that they probably can't back up the God claim.
You sent me a video talking about a God claim recently that was tethered to the belief in God was tethered to a values claim. So I believe in God, and you must get this all the time, but I believe in God because otherwise, where would I get my values? If you ask something like, it got down to the point where what would people do, if there were no God, and so then you had no, reason to have a prioritization of values. And then he answered, he said, are you one of those people that we should be worried about if there were no God? Such an interesting question. And I see those same, when it comes to politics, you can talk about values. I mean, there's a lot competing for your attention for each claim, and there's so much packed into each claim. But I wonder if one of the reasons why religion seems to inform political beliefs or persuasions is because religion often comes down to what people's values are or where they get them from. Yeah,
that discussion, if I remember, the individual was saying that people can't be, I don't know if he went this far. I think he was saying people can't be good without thinking that a God is real. And then we explored that, and more than likely he had other views that were probably tied to that. Like his view, I don't want to put words in his mouth,
Right.
but there was a person before him that I interviewed. I think, his view on abortion would change fundamentally if he didn't already think that there was a higher power. So then it makes me think, well, if we can help a person discover that they can't back up that claim, it might cause a chain reaction to look at other claims. It's really fascinating. It's fascinating how it's all tied together. Yeah.
Better and worse situations to use this method, or do you can you do it more and less, I guess, aggressively? That's probably a bad word, depending on the situation.
I've seen aggressive uses of this approach where all the right questions are being asked, but the delivery of it is just is what's the word I'm looking for? It's like coming from a place of anger or spite. Like, how do you define the word God? What's your biggest reason for thinking that that's true? What if that reason wasn't around? Is that really a reliable method? Like the delivery of the questions, it seems, is almost as important as the questions itself.
Yeah.
Which I think it's interesting. There's been this sort of waxing and waning of a charge of manipulation or something in what we're doing. Maybe you want to get into that, but it seems like if you can just take your ego out of it and be respectful and ask these questions, it's far more productive and effective than if you were aggressively asking these questions and being dismissive and cutting people off, but you were still driving to the reliability of the foundation. It seems like people are willing to stay engaged longer with you if you are respectful and you build trust and you're polite. But I'm not doing that because I think it's an effective technique. Like that's just my own personality. I'm not naturally an aggressive person. I've tried that. You can watch videos where I was aggressive because I'd seen other people be aggressive. And I thought, well, that's the only way that you can really talk to people about religion or something. And then once I realized that, no, I can still be my own normal, personable self and ask these really great questions, and people tend to respond to them really positively. So it's kind of this weird dilemma that I think we're in, where we're noticing, and other people who are worried about this approach, I think, are noticing the profound nature of these conversations and what's happening to the people afterwards. Like they're really moving, they're shifting in their level of confidence that something is true after a 10-minute talk. It's amazing.
So people think you hid some, there's like a Trojan horse in your delivery of this. And is that what people are worried about, you think? Like you're playing as though you just simply want to hear people's beliefs, but really there's a magic trick involved where you sway people to believe something different.
Yeah, I think there's that perception. And I can understand why there is that perception, because the book that started all this is called A Manual for Creating Atheists. Now there's another book called How to Have Impossible Conversations.
Great
and
book.
Have you read it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I downloaded the audiobook, but yeah.
Oh, awesome. So I've been thinking about writing my own book because I've been doing this. It'll be going on 10 years, in about a year or so. So I was thinking about writing a book explaining this approach from the perspective of somebody who started off using it one way as a tool to get people to discard beliefs, to this other perspective of how can I help this person take another look at their views and maybe help them discover that they don't have a good justification for it, and then step back and let them figure it out on their own. And that's been a fundamental shift. But people look at the current state of it and they say, well, you're ignoring this ugly past, and you're only doing the nice stuff now because you've realized that this was problematic in the past or something. But this is growth. This has just been the natural progression of the growth of this method, at least from my perspective.
The second explanation you just offered actually sounded different than your explanation earlier in the talk. I know I think you were talking about Peter Boghossian's just growth over time. You just said, I think you just said, it shifted to this, how can I have interesting conversations with people and perhaps get them to think about the tools that they're using to come up with these beliefs, and maybe realize that they weren't using proper tools or something like that, which is different than what you said early on that you do, which maybe is why a book that you write could be interesting, because you were saying earlier on, you're not even really trying to do that. I mean, if it helps people decide or realize that the way that they're forming beliefs is not extremely reliable, then all the better. But it doesn't sound like that's your main goal at all.
The main goal today for myself, and the goal can fluctuate mid-conversation with somebody, because I'm going where they take me, and then suddenly it's not about helping them take another look at their views, but maybe it's about helping them, I don't know, realize that that's not a good method or something. It's hard to explain, but today my goal largely, I've got several goals. One of the main goals is bringing clarity to the person's claim and how they're verifying that it's actually true. That's a huge goal. Like let's try to boil this down to the most simple outline of what's propping up this whole belief of yours. In a very simple way. Let's if that's noise, let's set it aside. But if it's important, let's consider it. Oh, it's not important anymore? Okay, let's put that off to the side. Let's figure out what's really propping it up. And basically building a map of the belief structure. It's basically building a map of the belief structure that the person has with them in the most accurate representation as possible. It's not misrepresenting what they're saying. It's not tricking them with wording and slipping in unreliable methods so that they can think that their method is unreliable and they lower their confidence and come around to my view. No, I want to steel man them and help them build their strongest argument for their position. But if they don't have a good argument for their position or they can't justify it, helping a person discover that is very exciting. It's rewarding. And I think it's beneficial to the person who's holding the claim too, because then they can go out and figure out better reasons to justify it. Like, wow, yeah, telling that guy that I was raised to believe this probably isn't really the best reason for thinking that it's true. Maybe I should go find some good evidence for it. And then maybe a week later they find good evidence for it. And then a week later they see me and they come up again for another talk because they enjoyed the first one. And then we can evaluate the quality of that new reason that they have. That's ultimately my goal today, is to have people objectively take a look at the view that they have from an angle that they've never looked at it before. And then using their own standards, am I justified in thinking that that's true? And for some people, they don't have a high standard and they say, I'm comfortable going along with it, even though I can't back it up. I've had people say that literally. I know that I can't justify it, but I'm going to keep believing it anyways. I don't push. I'll thank them for their time. I'll invite them to come back. If they do come back, we can actually SE that. Do you think it's wise to go through life with beliefs that you can't justify? Is it only this belief that you can't justify that you're content holding, or are there other beliefs in your life where you're willing to hold yourself to that standard? But a large part of that is sort of figuring out where they're at and then stepping back to let them decide where they want to go next.
That sounds more like just having more interesting conversations rather than, and then they might be seemingly impossible conversations, but everything you're talking about just sounds like it makes a conversation worth having. I feel like when I talk to people who I can guess their next response and they can guess mine, that it's not interesting anymore. We're doing something that is probably destructive.
Well, what's funny is when we use this approach of SE, Street Epistemology, my conversation partner is often surprised by the things that they're saying. So I'm surprised by it because I'm hearing it for the first time. Right. But by active listening and repeating back what they're saying. So if I understand what you're saying, Zach, you think that this is true because you heard a creak in the night after you left out the water for the spears. Is that what you're saying? Now that you're repeating it back, it seems kind of crazy, but yeah, I think that's the reason why. Maybe is that the reason why? You start watching this inner dialogue, and that's where the beauty of it is. It's not me telling them. It's probably not wise to think that spirits are real because you hear a creak at night. It's them coming to that possible realization on their own.
has this whole process, this whole engagement with people that you've been doing for the past few years helped you figure out when not to have conversations?
Absolutely. Yeah, there have been a few times where sometimes the person says that they'll walk up to me and say, I hear that you've been asking lots of challenging questions and I don't like you being here and I think you should leave. I've kind of had that response. That's kind of rare. Or maybe they'll call the police on me or something. But
Wow.
Most often it's my own self-assessment. Like somebody's willing to talk with me and they reveal something about themselves that makes me think that they're particularly dependent on the belief. So the classic example that I'll use is something that literally happened where a woman said something like, I've been struggling with a mental disorder for the longest time. I was suicidal. All the medicine that they gave me didn't work, but it was only when I accepted myself into the arms of Jesus that I was able to cope. And now I'm going to school and I've got straight A's. And, oh, please go ahead and interview me on my claim. No, I'm not going to do that. I actually had that same person got upset with me for not questioning them because they had just listened to me question their friend in much the same way. And then they came and wanted me to interview them. And I probably could have been a little bit more diplomatic in how I declined interviewing them, but it was a little funny that they wanted me to interview them, but I didn't want to interview them because I thought it could cause them some harm.
That's really interesting. Yeah. That's a little different. I mean, you're already questioning people's beliefs who, in some sense, they can be load-bearing for different reasons. It's an extra element to have somebody tell you that they've overcome some sort of traumatic experience in their life, and by virtue of this belief. Yeah.
Load bearing is a great way of describing it because you are tugging at the foundation of those walls when you're asking these questions. I've had conversations. There's a whole series of talks that I had with this young guy named Shane, for anyone that's really interested in what I'm doing, where we don't even get into the reliability of his method. It's all about this ancillary stuff like, do you think truth is objective? And what do you think about bias? And could you get your morality from something else other than this God if we discovered that you can't support the God reason? And what really is propping up your belief that this is true? It was all this, we were sort of like inspecting the walls and the foundation without really tugging on them. But it was still valuable to do because when you start tugging on these things, sometimes they're really easy to slip and the whole thing can collapse. And it could be very devastating to people who weren't expecting that they now need to rethink their lives and rebuild new tribes and find communities to go to or get support. That was one of the shocking things about this method that I learned fairly quickly on, is that the questions can be really profound to people, and you could be fundamentally impacting people in ways that you never expected. So there's a responsibility as a practitioner to keep that in mind. But there's no formal professional standard for people who use this method. And maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. I think a large part of the growth that you've seen in street epistemology over the years is probably because we go out and do whatever the hell we want. But I think that there's a risk there too. We could discover years from now that this is really harming people. When I first started off doing this, I was thinking, this would really be cool if it worked, but what if it actually harmed people? And we needed to say, hold on, stop, go back, don't do this anymore. We could reach the point, but even if that happened, I remember having this dialogue with myself thinking, even if we discovered that this is problematic, it would be useful. The journey would have still been useful because now we can realize that this is troublesome in some way. But I got to tell you, man, the feedback that I'm getting, and we have a few people that are concerned on the periphery, and they surface their concerns, and we try to address those. But for the most part, people seem to enjoy taking another look at their views in this method where they don't feel attacked. They feel supported. They feel like it's in a trusting environment, that there are resources for them if they are struggling with it, where we're going at the pace that they're comfortable with. You know, we're walking that journey with them, and then sort of, okay, where are you going next? You know, they're leading, we're going on this hiking path, and and they're leading the walk. You're just sort of asking them, now, why did you go left instead of right there?
Would you say if you're doing it right, it's sort of a fail-safe because people are not going to go too much farther than they're comfortable going?
It seems that way. I think people recognize, okay, now that's a little dark up there over that hill. I'm not exactly sure I want to go over there. What does that look like over there? Do I know anyone that's gone over there and come back? Maybe I can talk to them.
That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice for people who want to extend this sort of method or these kinds of conversations into everyday life, or just constructive conversations with people who they feel would be worth having constructive conversations with?
Man, I have so many ideas. Like right now, you notice people maybe occasionally using this approach on Facebook or Twitter, or you watch a YouTube video. I would love to get to the point where we see people teaching these tools to others in creative environments using creative methods like cartoons, or somebody's actually developing an adventure role-playing game that will incorporate a lot of the techniques of SE as this character is going from level to level. And it's very fascinating. Another thing that I'd like to see is once people learn street epistemology and you become proficient at it, it's okay to leave the SE community and go into your gaming community. Or let's say that you're in Black Lives Matter. Use this tool with the people in your own tribes, because this will help people form the best arguments for their views, and I think get us closer to the actual truth of the matter. That's what I would love to see. I would love to see people sort of cycle through the SE community and then go to their respective tribes and bring that tool set to them. This isn't just a tool for atheists to use with theists, or skeptics to use with people who talk about anti-vaxxers or something like that. You can use it for that, but we want to see it permeate all aspects of our life, because it seems like an incredible way to actually get to what's really propping up these views.
And you think it's more beneficial? I know that you are hesitant to claim certainty, but do you believe that it's more beneficial to have these conversations with, insofar as there is an aisle, your side of the aisle? For instance, I started a group a long time ago. It's called The Social Exchange, the namesake of this podcast. And the podcast was supposed to be something akin to what you're doing with street epistemology. And it turned into my niche, which is addiction. People want to talk about psychology and addiction. And so I formed this group, and more people got interested in it. And it turns out the people who believe the things I believe are largely progressive liberals. And I started out as a progressive liberal, but as I had more and more conversations opposite of you, I think I started moving right. So I would say maybe if I had to put myself somewhere, maybe I'm like a center left or libertarian left or something like that. I find it difficult but interesting to have conversations with members of my own group. I find it easier and less anxiety provoking for some reason to have conversations with people I totally disagree with.
How interesting.
Yeah. So it's almost like I feel, if I'm not careful, I can feel like I'm abandoning my tribe.
Sure.
That's the opposite of critical thinking, of course, but I get caught in that. So I'm at a point now where I've done enough critical thinking that it's easier for me to talk to somebody with a totally opposite persuasion, with the understanding that that's what we're up to, than it is for me to talk to somebody who might say, hey, you're supposed to be on the left like me.
Yeah.
I forget where the question was in there. I think it was, is it better to clean up your own side of the aisle or something like that?
It's kind of hard to clean up your own side of the aisle, especially if people sort of know that your shtick is asking questions to challenge positions in a respectful way.
Yeah.
So if I was to observe someone in my progressive atheist tribe say something that is odd to me, and I might say something like, do you mind if we explore that a little bit? They may never respond to me. Whereas if there was somebody who was right-leaning that knew this tool, they would probably be more effective in engaging that person, because that person might think, well, I might have a chance with this person. And bottom line, I think there's advantages for everybody, regardless of where you stand on any claim, to learn the approach. Because you may get more traction with a person where you're not exactly coming at each other on an equal footing or in agreement. You know, you're coming at it from a place of, we actually disagree on a lot of things, it might actually be easier to use the tool when you disagree with the person. This is I can almost say that that's probably factually true, because I had a conversation. I'm actually a little worried about, this is the one conversation that I'm kind of worried about uploading.
Excited to hear about it.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about it. Because I'm not sure how my tribe is going to react to it. So I'm worried about it. But then again, I'm using the technique on racism. We're talking about racism, and we're not having very productive talks about race, it seems, generally. We're posting memes, we're uploading stats that nobody finds compelling.
Agree.
We're talking past each other. And this was a really good talk. But as it turned out, we both agreed with his stance. And this was a black man, and I agreed with him that it's something to the effect of black people can be racist. And it was a lovely talk, and I asked a few good questions, but it wasn't as probing as some of my other conversations in the past have been. And I'm a little worried that people will say, well, you gave him a pass because you agree with him. And it's funny, because at the end of the conversation, I lamented my inability to really challenge him as much as I normally would have, because I largely agreed with what he was saying. But I recognized that, and I encouraged him to bring up other people, his friends, who disagreed with him, so that we can explore it together. That's why I think that there's some limitations to the tool if you tend to agree with the person who you're interrogating respectfully, which leads to my wanting to promote it to as many people as possible.
Yeah.
Because that individual may be more adequately challenged than I could have done if he was being asked questions by somebody who fundamentally disagreed with him.
Excellent point. Yeah. Do you find that when you let's put it this way, have there been other videos you've been hesitant to upload, and which you've been surprised at either the positivity or the negativity that came your way?
There have been a few in the past. The one that comes to mind recently is with a young woman who, you hear this term woke, or some people are even saying that woke can be a religion, that there's a religion of wokeism. And she was basically, so here I am, a white guy, asking this young woman who is I think she's an indigenous. Did you see this one?
No. I just.
Okay. I think she's like a Native American who studies indigenous cultures, and she was of the position that her methodology for determining if something is factually true, and we use this box of Tic Tacs as a thought experiment, where if there were two tribes and one tribe said that the total number of pieces inside this Tic Tac box of candies was odd, and then there was another tribe that said that the total number of pieces was even, that the tribe with the most aggrieved history, the oldest and most aggrieved narrative, wins. That was her methodology, that you go by who was most disenfranchised, who struggled the most. That's the truth of the matter. And I was really worried, because I thought, there are people who are promoting this idea that woke is a religion, and they could use this video to further an agenda. I don't want people to ever propagandize the discussions that I have, because they really are coming from a place, at least from my perspective, of let's figure out the truth of the matter, if we can. And how reliable is your process? How good are your reasons? But I can see people in these different tribes using these conversations that they're watching to say, look at that fool.
That's a representation of wokeism, right? That's
let's take the craziest argument here and put this forward and say that's what everybody thinks. Now, maybe most people in that culture do think that, and this could be a wonderful video example to show, like, hey, like the way that they're going about coming to truths is probably problematic. But I would love it if this individual would learn street epistemology and bring it into her tribe. Tribe meaning group. I'm not talking like tribe, but yeah, I think there's strength in people learning the tool and using it on their own claims and the claims within their own communities and outside of it too.
That's interesting. So, I'm being mindful of time, but if you are telling people, why don't you come up with a topic? Well, that's kind of how this whole thing works. But if you interview only one person who is ostensibly representative of wokeism, you almost want to say, any other woke people who want to have this conversation, and it messes up the methodology, right? You wouldn't want to invite a woke convention and say, let me talk to each of you, or you wouldn't want to say, hey, can we talk about what it means to be woke, or would you?
I think I would be willing to go to, and I've literally raised money to go to the general convention in Utah to talk to Mormons. Okay. So I'm not against the idea of specifically going to speak to a tribe, a group, a mimetic tribe, and challenging their reasoning. Like, I think that that's healthy, but I can see how people might say, well, why did he go to the Mormons? Why isn't he going and talking to the atheists? Well, I do as well. So I'm not going to be upset. I wouldn't dismiss anyone who wanted to specifically target a specific tribe, but I think you should be open to explaining what you're, definitely explain to them what you're trying to do, and then encourage them to bring their best argument forward. You can do that. Again, this is a tool and people can pick it up and wield it any way that they want. It just all comes down to what are your own motivations? What are you hoping to achieve? But like, if I only use this for people that I would say are woke, I think that could be problematic. I think that would rightly give people the impression that I'm biased.
Yeah.
And I'm using it to like, knock down some tribe.
That might be a difficult element of bias, that you could go into it with the idea that you don't have a bias, but if it's one single persuasion, you almost can't avoid developing one.
Yeah. But then again, I mean, maybe they really, people in these different groups, I don't want to focus on one particularly, but
yeah,
in the course of questioning people, like I've literally talked to people who advocated for open carry. Like, I literally would look on their Facebook page and see where they were going to be, and I would go there to talk to them. But I ended up softening on my views on open carry by doing so.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I want to.
They had some good arguments.
That's you think that would be a dangerous thing to do? You go in if you were arguing against open carry, and you go to the place where the people have the most guns.
Well, before, when I was transitioning from the argumentative in your face approach to the SE approach,
right,
I literally crafted signs and went to open carry rallies to yell at people with guns. And what happens is you start recognizing people and they start recognizing you, and you become on a first name basis. And then, they like one of your comments on a post or something. And then before you know it, you're treating them nicely and humanely. But that's where the progress is made, is when you start seeing people as people.
I want to be super mindful. I asked if you could have an hour of your time. I think I've stolen a little more than that, but I wonder if I can ask you just two ending questions. And one is, where can people find your work, and how do you what advice would you give them if they want to just start using this method, a one-on-one basis?
One-on-one is probably best. I think you'll make the most progress with somebody if it's a one-on-one with less distractions. But just go to streetepistemology.com. You'll find links to the Discord servers that we have, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook groups, Facebook pages. There's a study guide. We're in the process of developing a course for people that they can do a self-directed course and teach themselves how to use this method, and then also bounce it off the community if you get a little bit stuck.
Anthony, thank you so much for joining me today.
It was a real pleasure being on your show for the second time. Thank you for listening to what I have to say about street epistemology, and I hope people take the time to look into it. I think you'll like what you see.
Dude, thanks again so much.